another episode of Confessions of a Career Coach with Elena Agar. In today's episode, I want to talk about a topic that is not covered. And the confession today is that I also didn't pay attention to these numbers for majority of my career in talent development and working with young talent and so on. And it's just in recent kind of last year that it has come to my attention that with all these different diversity and inclusion initiatives that we have in organizations, we somehow forgot a very important part of the population, which is men. There has been so much push for equal pay for women and different initiatives around inclusivity and diversity and so on for different populations in the workforce. And men are rarely being mentioned anymore. And even worse than that, we're not really talking about it. Now, listen, I'm all up for, women, team women over here, like let's get that equality and so on. That's a whole other topic, and I have my own views and opinions about that. But I want to spend this episode talking about the fact that we are neglecting men in the workforce. So there's been several reports coming out in recent year and even beyond that, but they're not really mainstream media, so you might not even be coming across from them. But as DI professionals, for those that are listening, not to put any shade on you or anything, but if you're not spending, at least some of your time focusing on young men entering the workforce, I would just, maybe just think of, like audit your own kind of process in that, because I think that is an important factor for several reasons. So I'll give you some statistics, like recent statistics that came out. So just for comparison, in 1953, 98% of men in the age range of between 25 and 54 years old held a job or were looking for one. That number obviously has fallen since then. Today, we have 7.2 million men that have essentially dropped out of the workforce. In addition to that, some other stats are just over the last 50 years in general, the male labor force participation in the US has fallen over 10 percentage points, right? So in 1970, for example, it was 80% of men that were in the workforce between these age groups. Then it dropped to 69% in January 2020, and it continues to keep dropping. And there's a lot of different issues with that. And by no means am I an expert on men being in a workplace, but it's a big problem considering the fact that some other stats, 76% of suicides are men, 84% of homeless are men, 70% of homicide victims are men, 40% of domestic abuse victims are men. Men on average serve 64% longer in prison. They're also on average 3.4 times more likely to be in prison than women when both committed the same crime and so on. So what I'm trying to get at is that I feel like it's all connected. If we're not investing in young male talent coming into the workforce, they're more prone to fall into these statistics. And yet there's been so much push to supporting women in the workforce. Wonderful. Yes, there's been some progress that's been made, but let's not forget the men. There's also a lot of social impacts. The fact that we are getting, that single family households are, in terms of single parent households, are increasing. More and more people are lonely. Young people, in particular, Gen Zs, are more lonely than ever. Suicide rates are high. There's a lot of societal issues aside the workplace issues, the fact that we're short in talent, and that's a big challenge. And that, again, we're not really addressing it. That's a problem. And I myself, the confession I made in the beginning of this video is that I really didn't pay attention until I started it came across my radar. I don't know how. I started reading the statistics and I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, well, that leads to a larger problem, that a societal problem. But even if you look from a DI perspective, we're doing something wrong. And if you look at it from a talent perspective in the realm that I'm at, and being a recruiter and having done talent development of some capacity in the last decade or so, and having worked in higher educations, it's been lovely to see that women are exceeding men in jobs, in education, opportunities, and so on. But let's not leave men behind, because it's not benefiting our society by any means. So if we're talking about equality, let's really keep it equal. Equality does not mean men being left behind and we as women just, becoming the men we wish we could marry type thing. I'm not a fan of that agenda and of that push. So yeah, I don't know where we go from here, but it's an important topic. I'm going to have more discussions about this on my podcast. I have been also bringing in guests to talk about this topic because it is alarming. And with all the societal issues that are tied into this, I really think we need to start thinking about how we can help more young men in particular join workforces, train them, and making sure that they're not adding up to be in those statistics.